Winnipeg Jets preseason continues to roll right along, and while Friday night may not have gone exactly to plan, the Jets are still trying to figure out who's going to start for them this season. Find out what transpired against the Oilers on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are chatting about the halfway point of preseason, have a couple of games under Winnipeg's belt. Unfortunately, no wins in the first three attempts. Maybe in the final couple of games this week, we'll see something emerge for the Jets. But, as we go through preseason, losses obviously don't matter, but I think Winnipeg would probably prefer to see some stronger performances, maybe some guys really step up and sort of seize the reins. But I think we've seen some positive signs from a couple of the young kids, some moments of growth, some improvements, a lot of the details that will help some of these guys become good pros. And we'll chat about all of that and what was demonstrated against the Oilers, who's standing out so far, and maybe some thoughts about some of the Jets' depth this upcoming season in just a moment. Before we do, though, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com, and you could win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, I did mention that the game against the Oilers did not go super well, if we're being honest. Winnipeg had a really tough outing, ended up conceding 4 goals, really couldn't get a ton of offense going. I would say, generally speaking, both teams really didn't create a lot on most of the shifts. There were some really scrambly moments, maybe a couple of really greasy goals, and that was, I think, a majority of the offense. Winnipeg probably could have potted 1 or 2 goals off of some goal mouth scrambles that unfortunately the puck just didn't quite settle down. And the Oilers mostly created off of a couple of busted Jets turnovers, some mistakes here and there from some of the kids and even some of the veterans. I think one of the most notable ones being, Nemesnikov in his first game. He hasn't played in a while, and you could kind of tell the rust was still there. He had a bit of a rough turnover behind the net, and that immediately turned into a goal against. Not really something you expect to see from him during the regular season. So, as you can tell, guys are still warming up. It is preseason after all. And, for a guy like Nemesnikov, he's been around a while, so I'm sure he'll be happy that it wasn't the regular season and that, these games really don't count. But otherwise, despite the scoreline, I don't think it was quite as lopsided as it seemed. The Jets definitely had some pretty good shifts. The power play, especially the unit led by Jokin, Lambert, and, some of the kids, I thought looked pretty fun. There were some really good opportunities, and I think the Jets, you could kind of tell, generally relied a lot on some of the older veterans for the first chunk of the game, and then later on we saw some more of the shifts from the kids, and I thought the younger players, generally stood out pretty well. We already know what to expect from guys like Niederreiter and Nemesnikov, players of that ilk, but we haven't really had as many opportunities to see kids like Lambert and Barlow and some of the others really step up against, older competition, right? The Oilers brought out, players like Nurse and a few others who are maybe a little bit more of the established guard for Edmonton. Certainly no McDavid or anything in this game, but, Nurse has a pretty well-known, pretty pronounced offensive reputation, pretty famous. You've got guys like Kasperi Kapanen, Andrew Mangiapane, Brett Kulak, Troy Stetcher. So quite a few NHLers in this mix to answer what Winnipeg brought. And I think you could kind of tell that this was generally more of a battle of the depth units, especially from Winnipeg's perspective. We didn't really have a lot of top offense, and I think that definitely showed on some chances here. But overall, I wasn't really too upset. I think the one guy that probably won't be super thrilled with his outing will probably be DiVincentis. I think some of the goals against him, he'll probably not be as happy about. it is what it is, right? Not much you can really say about that other than he'll probably want a couple of those opportunities back. But yeah, it was just one of those games where a lot of forechecking, some solid defensive plays from guys who are trying to really stake a claim to an NHL spot. You saw some of the Moose guys put on some solid shifts. Just kind of a neither here nor there game, I would say. I think the line for the Jets that's probably going to get the most attention from this game is the Barron line, because that's likely your fourth line. And yeah, of that trio, I thought Barron probably had one of the strongest outings. Koepka also really good. We'll talk a little bit about him and his acquisition by the Jets. If there's a guy on that trio that I thought really did struggle, though, it was probably Pearson. Tanner looked a bit on the slower side in his first game, and in his second game, that hasn't really changed. It's clear that mentally, and certainly with the hands and brain, all of that's there, but the actual skating speed, it's rough. I didn't realize he had unfortunately gotten such a reduction in his mobility over the years. But compared to where he was when he was with the Kings, and even during some of his Canucks days, his mobility has really declined, and it's actually going to be slow enough to where you might not really want him doing a lot on this fourth line. It was clear that he was struggling to keep up. He couldn't do some of the transition and breakouts. It's tough to see because, I know that clearly his vision and hands and shooting are still all there. I mean, all the stuff that you want on a good depth scorer is present. It's just the feet are going to hold him back. So, yeah, that was harder to see. A little unfortunate because I know that he's still got all of the other traits that you want. It's just the feet and skating continue to be a bit of a concern, and I don't know that that's going to change throughout the season. In the past, I've said stuff about, maybe some of the slower skaters compensating with smart decision making and stuff like that. With Pearson, I don't know if that's really going to be possible. The skating is slow enough to where it's holding him back in other areas. So I think what you're going to see with him, probably more limited deployments. I think for the fourth line, it's really going to come down to Barron and Koepka to kind of really carry that load. Pearson, again, I think a lot of the brain power is there, but it's actually getting up to speed and keeping that pace sustained that I think is a bit of an issue. So otherwise, the Jets, I think, probably did about what you'd expect. Not a lot of offensive potential here in this unit outside of the Zilkin line. I think for the most part, the Jets just really struggled to get a lot going. Edmonton was kind of annoying to play against. If you want some fun stuff, there was a big fight between Tyrell Bauer and Brown from the Oilers. That was a heavyweight tilt. Bauer, in my mind, won that one pretty cleanly. He just unleashed quite a few hooks, tired Brown out, and that was that. So big heavyweight tilt. Brown held his own for a good portion of the fight and looked pretty impressive himself. But otherwise, if you're looking for some other interesting notes, guess who led the ice time on defense? Ville Heinola. That I thought is kind of noteworthy in a way. I thought he had a pretty solid game all around. His puck moving ability and transition stuff, I thought really looked very strong. He kind of seemed assured of himself and even absorbed a big hit or two and still managed to get back up. So overall, solid outing for him, and really just a solid outing for some of the kids. Lambert, I thought, made some smart plays here and there, had a couple of decent opportunities. Gustafsson didn't really have as much of a noteworthy game. Jokin, I thought, looked all right. You'll see some minuses for a lot of these guys. I don't think it was quite as bad, again, as it looks. Just a couple of scrambly shifts, and, unfortunately, DiVincentis wasn't quite up to his usual standards. So, overall, just a game you'll probably not really think too much about. I will say, though, that, for the fourth line, the Jets may have some found money in Cole Koepka. We'll chat about why coming right up. But speaking of found money, if you want to find $300 in bonus bets, the only way you can do it is by going to FanDuel and downloading the FanDuel app right now. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel helps you figure out whether you're going to select the next Super Bowl winner or maybe just a weekend warrior matchup. Obviously, Ravens versus Chiefs for me is going to be of precedence and importance this weekend. I'm hoping Baltimore finally beats Kansas City in Kansas City. They never win. Maybe this is the year that you should get in on the action and bet a Baltimore win. Or if you think Mahomes is still going to do Mahomes stuff, this is your chance to win big on a Kansas City home victory. All you have to do is bet $5, and if your first $5 bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets. So, ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are recapping some thoughts from the Jets versus the Oilers and some early preseason observations. We have 3 games now under the belt. No victories so far, but despite the defeats, I think some interesting and positive signs from a lot of the Jets kids that we were really hoping would take steps forward. Outside of some of the kids, though, if there's a player that I would say was really impressive so far through his first couple of preseason games, I got to give a lot of credit to Cole Koepka. I thought Koepka would be solid as a fourth-line guy coming into the Jets. He's actually played well enough to where I'm a little bit surprised that the Bruins let him go. Now, you're not going to be seeing Koepka being a world beater. You know, he's not like a top-line talent. But, you know, for a player who is probably going to be cast as a fourth-line guy, I'm starting to understand how he had 10 goals despite playing like 11 minutes. Koepka's just good. He's a really smart player. And if he had actually had, you know, a more elite tool set, I sort of wonder what he might have been in another timeline. He is very impressive. I think what has really stood out with Koepka is sort of the instincts and the timing and spacing. I feel like every time he's in the defensive zone, for instance, he usually makes a really smart read. On the PK, he'll jump, you know, a passing or shooting lane. He'll force a turnover. There was a sequence in the offensive zone I also remember where Edmonton was about to get a counter, and Koepka pressured the puck carrier and actually used his skate to dislodge the puck off the stick, force a turnover, and then I think he ended up getting control and creating a chance out of it. That is really heady stuff. I would almost describe it as more of like a cerebral sort of play. You don't really see a lot of depth guys demonstrating that level of skill. So if Koepka actually does this stuff in a Jets uniform, don't be shocked if he gets over 20 points. I mean, he did really intriguing stuff that I wasn't anticipating. There's clearly a layer of skill here over what you'd expect from most fourth liners. So for the Jets, whoever picked this guy out, I think they've done a good job. Of the signings, he might actually be one of the ones that I'm really excited about in a way, just because I think he's going to have a lot of versatility. And he might even actually have some upside. You know, yes, he is perhaps past the most prime age of young forwards, but he's still 27, and he doesn't really have a lot of NHL experience on his resume. Parts of 2 seasons and then most of last year with the Bruins, he might have been in Tampa Bay's system for a reason. He's a very interesting player. I think for the Jets, he's going to be found money. And if he can do a lot more of this stuff, both at even strength and on the PK, I think he's a guy you might want to keep around beyond this year. So really nice find. Again, I sort of compared him to the Kevin Stenlund signing a couple of seasons ago. I thought Stenlund was a really nice ad. And, you know, since moving to the Panthers, he's been great found money for them there too. So Koepka, I'll say this, you know, I think he's legitimately a smart signing by the Jets. Also, he's kind of closer to home in some ways. You know, he's from Minnesota, so just a bit of a hop, skip, and a jump away. Not a bad player to maybe keep around for the foreseeable future, especially if he has a strong debut season with the Jets. So far, early preseason goings, I've got to say, I'm really liking what I'm seeing to date. I've also got to say from Morgan Barron, I feel like I've come away feeling pretty good about his game. The past couple of seasons, he's gone hot and cold over, you know, some long stretches. It's a little hard to read him. You know, there are moments where he demonstrates like really good top 6 skill. He'll battle like 6 defenders to get to the net. And there aren't even 6 guys on the ice, but with the amount of dudes marking him, it certainly looks like it. he is like single-handedly going through an entire roster just to try and get the puck through the neutral zone, fight for an offensive opportunity. He had one of those sorts of solo efforts where he was fighting off 3 or 4 defenders who had swarmed him, and he still just muscled his way through with that inside step and that upper body strength of his, where he's got a pretty big, powerful frame. He got a shot off, if I recall correctly, and that's the sort of thing that I think really makes Barron an intriguing option for your fourth line. The problem with his game the past couple of years is that it comes and goes in waves. There are times where he's really dominant and is just honestly a bit of an animal on skates, and then there are games where it just seems like he's not really a noticeable factor. And I'm not really expecting a fourth line center to be a game changer, but I think with Barron, he demonstrates enough to where you see more potential in him, right? There's something else there to his game that doesn't feel like your average fourth liner. It just hasn't really coalesced into something super consistent. So this is the year where I'm kind of hoping it does. He's, obviously got a new contract and all, so I'd like to see him maybe take that next step forward and be a really solid middle six option. I don't know that it's going to happen necessarily, and he may always just be a really solid fourth liner. But if he can find that extra gear to really elevate his game and become a more versatile bottom six player, I wonder if you might start to see more deployments for him, right? The Jets have a lot of depth issues at center past the top line. And Taves is going to help a lot. It's also maybe unfair to expect, especially at the start of the season, so much of Taves. He has plenty of NHL success, but again, 2 years out, it's been a while, and you want to kind of integrate him back into the team and really the league at a reasonable, rate, so to speak. So having a guy like Barron who can really help maybe relieve some of that pressure, eat some of those shifts while Taves gets back up to speed, I think would be really valuable, especially if Morgan can kind of take that vaunted next step. He is kind of at the age where he's probably mostly what he is, but that doesn't mean that he can't find a level of consistency late in his career that starts to really approach maybe the player that I thought he could be a couple seasons ago. There was a year where he had like 10, 12 goals, and I thought he was primed to take a big step forward. Then the following season was a little more inconsistent, still decent, but for a fourth line guy, I don't think you can really complain. I think he has those skill moments where you feel like there's more there, and he can still do some of the two-way work to be an impactful player. At wing, Pearson continues to be a bit of a question mark for me, but I think the Jets have plenty of other fourth line guys who can help out if things don't always go well. Fagemo, I thought, has been pretty decent. He's looked like a solid call-up option in case somebody gets hurt. I wouldn't ask him to be, more than a bottom six player. I think he doesn't quite have the next layer of skill that you're looking for in a full-time NHLer, but he's done enough in camp and preseason to where I think you could comfortably ask him to play a couple of games. You've also got Parker Ford in your system, and Ford is actually a pretty solid player, and I think a guy who would do quite well alongside a Koepka and Barron. In fact, Ford's kind of like other Koepka, I guess, where Cole might be, a little headier and a very smart player. Ford has, some really great forechecking and offensive instincts. Maybe it'd be worth giving him a shot too, We haven't really seen much of him since last year, and of course the injury kind of sidelined him for a good bit, so the Jets might have a really fun fourth line this year. They've got a lot of options for competition. I hope they don't just go with the out-and-out veterans just because they're veterans. Give that spot some competition. Look for some players who can help you add some scoring depth. You've got your top 9 more or less locked in. I don't think the fourth line should be nearly as set in stone as maybe some of the other trios are. We know that the top line's not changing. We know that the second line's probably more or less fixed. Give yourself some room to breathe and see what you can squeeze out of your bottom six. This is where I think you have the most opportunity to improve with some of the internal choices in camp competition, right? If, maybe Pearson isn't quite ready to go, but Gustafsson is, why not give David that spot too? He's worked his butt off for the past couple of years. He's got that forechecking ability. He's a generally strong skater. See if he can also give you something too. Chibrikov also out there, another solid depth option. I just think the Jets sometimes, bring in some free agents, and they don't always give, more of the kids a real chance to earn a spot. Heinola, I think, has kind of had to really fight to stake his claim, and we'll have to see how the Jets plan to use him this year, if at all. So, lots of interesting stuff. I want to give some broader thoughts about the preseason so far, what's really stood out, what maybe needs some work heading into the start of the year, coming up in just a brief moment. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's closing thoughts as we're just walking through some broader thoughts from the start of preseason. First couple of games are under the belt, and I think the Jets have kind of shown that offensively, we're going to have maybe a little bit of trouble on the goal scoring side outside of the power play. I think the 5v5 game, though, is going to be really leaning on a strong forecheck, a really tight defensive structure, and very grindy hockey that kind of leans into maybe more of your depth lines than usual. I think that this is where the Jets can maybe flip the script a bit. The top six has traditionally had to do a lot of the heavy lifting. If the Jets can find a way to squeeze out more offense out of the bottom six, I think that's going to be the biggest thing. A lot of the first couple of games have been very Moose heavy, so we haven't had a ton of time to really look at a lot of the depth players. Outside of some of the more established names, we just saw Nemesnikov finally filter back in. We've seen a game or two with Niederreiter. We know what these dudes can do. We know what Morgan Barron can probably do. Koepka, you've got a new arrival. Pearson, another new arrival. Nyquist, he's probably in your top six, but ideally, perfect world, probably in your bottom six. Taves would be ideal as your 3C, but will be the 2C for the time being. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and I think this is where the Jets really have to win by committee. Winnipeg doesn't have maybe the crazy offensive talent as some of these top-end contenders, but they can still win their way in a lot of scenarios. Is it going to hold up in the playoffs? Maybe not, and you've heard me talk about that before. But during the regular season, I think the Jets can win a lot of games with the kind of hockey that we've generally seen. Hardworking, industrious, generally responsible. You didn't see a ton of brain-dead mistakes. There were some moments where, the rust from offseason has obviously still not been shaken off. But for the most part, I think Winnipeg has generally been pretty stingy. You're not seeing the Jets bleeding an insane amount of shots. And I would say for the most part, even in this game against the Oilers where they lost 4-0, generally speaking, a lot of the chances Edmonton actually scored on weren't really that dangerous. There were only one or two where it was just a really bad giveaway that was right in front of goal, and that ended up giving Edmonton an easy opportunity. But for the most part, the Oilers scored greasy stuff from either distance or maybe something that you'd like DiVincentis to kind of save. In the other games, I don't really think Winnipeg was super wide open either. This is kind of textbook Arneal hockey. A tight forecheck, really close defensive gapping, every man back really defending tightly, trying to make sure that the passing and shooting lanes are clogged up. I think it's a good way to compensate for maybe not having, the McDavid and the Draisaitl's of the world. Winnipeg, I think, is going to be set to do the regular season well. It's going to be one of those scenarios where they'll probably hover close to the 100-point mark, if not meeting it. And I think they'll be, in the top 3 or 4 spots in the Central. The playoffs, maybe it'll be a bit of a challenge. I think this is where you really hope that either an internal upgrade arrives or the Jets make some kind of a big trade. I don't know if it'll be earlier in the season or later. I think Winnipeg wants to see what they have first. I don't expect them to go super aggressively at the start of the season looking for an upgrade. Unless something really falls through and there's an option, I don't think the Jets are likely to go out and get something until they have a more firm sense of what this team is capable of heading into the maybe the first third of the season. Once they hit that point, I think they'll have a clear idea of whether this squad's really going to be playoff worthy. I don't really worry about them making it too much. I just think that as is, if you get to the postseason, that's where some of the lack of high-end 5v5 offense might be a bit of a challenge. I think the team will do really well on the forecheck and defensively, but you need that extra layer of goal scoring, and I think the Jets might not have that yet. So That'll be something to keep an eye out on. I think the power play should be pretty good. The power play, despite having a lot more grindy players so far, I thought has had some good puck movement. The units where you have maybe more of the Lamberts and the kids, I thought have looked bright and created some good chances. They haven't exactly hit pay dirt much, but I think that'll come eventually. So not too worried about that. Otherwise, if there's a big thing that I've kind of wondered about, it's the overall 5v5 offensive potential. The Jets are going to have lots of guys who can win wall battles and stuff, but how much will that translate to a lot of 5v5 even strength scoring? That part I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, 5v5 offense isn't exactly a new concern for the Jets, but with the departures of Ehlers, Appleton, guys like that, you have a lot of newcomers, and I don't know if they're necessarily going to be on the same level. I think you're going to get different kinds of lines out of these new arrivals. So, yeah, going to be an interesting year. We also have to kind of figure out what's going on with the Kyle Connor contract, because it did seem like they were making progress. Now they've hit a bit of a new stop, and it's around the contract structure, really around bonuses. The Jets do not like to give bonuses. They don't like a ton of full no movement clauses. Kind of seems like Connor is asking the Jets to do a very Marner sort of deal, and that is highly unusual for the Jets. Winnipeg has never done this before. They've never spent this much money on a single player, and I wonder if they're having second thoughts about it. We'll talk about more of this heading into the weekend after tomorrow's preseason game, and sort of figuring out what exactly is going on with the situation, how it's going to play out. Obviously, this is going to have a big impact on the season ahead, and if the Jets can't figure out what to do with Connor before the start of the season, you're heading into a really big contract year where every day that Connor doesn't have some sort of finality in the decision about his future as a Jet, his value does start to decrease. So big decisions for the Jets coming into the next couple of weeks, a lot to figure out. The camp is going to be reduced here over the next couple of days. We'll see some of the prospects get sent back. We'll have to be patient and see how these lines shake out, but I think we know roughly what the Jets are going to do at the start of the season. Let's just hope that it leads them to a deep playoff run and that they can find some resolutions to some of their biggest questions heading into the year. But for tonight's episode, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow for coverage of Winnipeg versus Calgary. So see you then. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.